So, as an associated professor in museology at Umea University, and with the studies in Moscow at in museology there, and master in Lund, I think you have a very unique perspective on memory, politics, research on difficult heritage. As us, we have this difficult heritage that unfortunately we share. I would like to, in our conversation, to explore how museum approaches to difficult heritage can actually inform strategies for contested monuments. The focus would be on monuments or public art, but I'm very interested how you do it in indoor spaces, so on curated spaces, and how can this experience of yours and of your work and your colleagues' work can be, why not externalized, so be put in an outdoor space, so a more public space, if I may speak. I consider myself the museum spaces as public spaces as well, but it's interesting how we relate to spaces in the first place. And I will also be curious, maybe you will give us more details about this idea, this concept of agonistic memory framework, which I find it very, very interesting, that proposes that there should be a normality in coexisting, in these conflicting memories coexisting. Actually, in our previous knowledge transfer interviews, we tackled the idea of master narratives, which actually, apropos the anti-racistic monument in Malmo, but which proposes kind of a different approach, but the same concept about this need actually to have more narratives around an issue. We call it issue, we don't call it problem, so to speak. So maybe you can, I don't know, jump in and say how you address in your work these, we can call it sensitive topics on nationalism, war, violence, atrocities. So this very actually painful or emotional issues that reflect sometimes or always in art or in artifacts. How would you deal with it? How would you present it? How would you have this narrative approach or narratives approach upon them? So please, okay.
Yeah, thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation. This is a very topical theme in my field of research as well, because museology studies not only museums per se, but also how we kind of turn things into heritage, how we perceive heritage and art, and what is the process of meaning making out of it. And I think in the contemporary field of museology, there we can observe the convergence with the memory studies as a field of studies. And I find it very useful, actually, to look at the museum institutions from the memory studies perspective. And from the memory studies, there comes these two theoretical frameworks that I'm working with. One is the agonistic approach to memory, and another one is the memory and activism and the relation between memory and activism. And both are very useful in the museum studies as well. So to start with one of them, maybe I can say that there's this inner contradiction in the museum institution per se, because there is this common perception of museums being objective and neutral stages and almost scientific institutions which are producing knowledge about our history, about the heritage, the everyday life of the past, especially if it's cultural historical museums, which are addressing some kind of phenomenon or the history of a group or a nation, and so on and so forth. And this notion of museum neutrality and objectivity has been contested last decades very much, and there's a ton of research about how we can actually approach difficult issues, sensitive past, how we can go away from this one homogeneous narrative of, let's say, nation state, if we talk about nation museums, national museums, which narrate one history of one people from the, I don't know, Stone Age, even though it's very hard to imagine that the people from Stone Age were kind of considering themselves as a nation or as a pra-nation of contemporary nation states. There is the work, the textbook, which is called Museum Activism, for instance, by Sunderland James, which comprises a lot of cases how museums are tackling these issues. This comes from the field of museum studies, and for memory studies, the framework that I think very useful when we look at the museum institutions is exactly this, with agonistic memory. And it comes from the political science, actually, which kind of tells us also that museums are political, they are not neutral, and we can operate with the concepts from political science in our work. And it comes from Chantal Mouffe's notion of radical democracy and agonism. It was coined by the research project that was called Unrest, and there is an article, the first article was published by Anna Bull and Hans Hansen, which kind of framed this approach, and they are talking about three modes of memory. The first one is antagonistic. It is us versus others. And when we talk about museums, it's very typical for, let's say, again, national museums. We have a homogeneous group which juxtaposed to others. And others can be like marginalized groups, but it can also be outside foreign enemy or the history of others. So this is very kind of classic 19th century model of museums, how we are building our heritage as opposed to someone else's heritage. And it is still alive. We cannot say that it was left in the 19th century. There are a lot of examples how these narratives are being operated, and the most kind of striking example is, of course, the Russian historical narratives, especially after the open full-scale invasion to Ukraine, when this kind of concept of us who are surrounded by the foreign enemies and everyone is against us, but we need to consolidate around our history and around our heritage is very prominent. So this is the first one, antagonistic. The second one, they call it cosmopolitan memory, and it's a term which is established in memory studies even before them. Cosmopolitan memory emerges after the Second World War, and it is connected very much to the notion of human rights, to the notion of reconciliation after the mass atrocities and violence and war. And cosmopolitan memory usually focuses on victims. And the commemoration of the victims of the Holocaust, for instance, is one of the prime example of the cosmopolitan memory. So there are not figures of us and others, there are figures of perpetrators and victims. And visitor in this kind of exhibitions supposed to feel empathy towards victims. And the of course, the upside of the cosmopolitan memory is exactly this, that we feel empathy, we feel affect, we feel compassion. But the downside is that it kind of almost always framed as, okay, the past is difficult, it's horrible what has happened, but we need to know about it, we need to reconcile, and then everything will be good. So this kind of never again framework of the Holocaust education and the memory of mass atrocities is very prominent in this kind of installations. And again, because I have this kind of focus also on the Russian heritage and museums, one of the examples from Russia is the Museum of Gulag, which is kind of framing the history of the camps as something that was in the past. And we now need to acknowledge it, we now need to reconcile with it, but there is no continuation to the current stage of history we are living in and to the current crisis, which is one of the downsides of the cosmopolitan approach. And it's very close to the Swedish model of self-consciousness also, because this focus on human rights and human suffering and victims is very something that Swedish museums are also working with, but it's almost like always ends up in this kind of consensus. Okay, we are all agree that never again. We all agree that this is very important to remember. But then it doesn't give the answer why we have this kind of events in the contemporary which are happening again. So again, never again. After each genocide, each war, each kind of difficult situation in the world, we start comparing it to our very well-known examples, but we cannot answer why, if we are so educated about mass atrocities and wars of the 20th century, why it still happens all over the world. So what Bull and Hansen suggest is this third mode, which is agonistic memory, and it comes from agonism, which is kind of Greek word for dispute and argument, but they talk about productive arguments. So we are not going to shy away from the horrible things in the past. We are not going to try and all agree on one point of view, but we try to put everything in the context, learn how, as much as possible about why, what actors are the only victims and perpetrators, or were there also bystanders? Were there also those who remained silent? Were there enablers or collaborators? And kind of try to see all this complexity and maybe even argue about it, because what Chantal Mouffe writes about radical democracy is that it is okay to not agree on everything, but if we can kind of run the democratic dialogue instead of fighting each other and keep up with the arguments, then it can be it can bring us to something, to new modes of knowledge, to new understandings and meaning makings about the difficult issues. And that's what I think, like classical museums, museum institutions are, of course, if they are coming from the 19th century, they mostly rooted in the antagonistic memory mode. Then they accepted the cosmopolitan memory mode, and new museums which were built in the second half of the 20th century were very much focused on the cosmopolitan mode, like all the Holocaust museums or the Canadian Museum for Human Rights, or the museums which are focusing on this one idea. But how we can actually work with diverse narratives and put them into the agonistic situation? How can we argue but be respectful and productive about our arguments? This is a great challenge for these institutions.
Yeah, very, very interesting. When you were talking about cosmopolitan memory, actually, the downside would be the first type of memory that you mentioned, because when you have empathy for the victims, actually you are against the perpetrator. So actually you take sides, even if it's not your own people, but actually you take sides with the so. These good and bad characters are still on. This apropos the thing that you the third type of memory that is more inclusive. Yeah, so maybe this would be a great moment for you to explain a bit this type of museum activism and what would you mean by that, and maybe in this context a bit to expand this idea when you are trying to also to have this multiple or to be open to multiple views or multiple narratives. Where do you stop? I mean, how many narratives, or are you having this dual view, this where the perpetrators are view and these are the victims view? So how large would professionally leave this approach of narrative? So there should be boundaries, physical boundaries as well. You don't have room for every type of narrative, but in the end, what lasts? What type of educational approach would be the one to win, actually?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it kind of pops up often in this discussion. Where are the boundaries of, pluralism, and should we include everyone? And I think it actually binds to the museum activism and this kind of frameworks. I can probably start with the example. When I was working on my PhD project, I was working with the museum project in Malmö in southern Sweden, and the project was called Museum of Movements. And it was supposed to be the National Museum for Democracy and Migration. So movements in this sense were both the migration of people, but also the social movements, activism, basically, and what are, because especially in Malmö, the civil society is very prominent, and there are many groups which are included in this kind of dialogues, how we can be culturally represented. You know this already from the discussion about the anti-racist monument and other kind of events which were happening there. So this museum project was based on a public dialogues with the interested actors and organizations, among other civil society organizations. And in the process of museum making, they had these dialogue meetings when everyone came to speak of what they are expecting from this museum, what should be exhibited there in the future, what type of activities there should be. And several times at these meetings, there was a question, okay, if we are talking about social movements, let's say the neo-Nazi movement comes and asks, why do you not talk about us in your museum, right? We are also a social movement. If you are a museum for democracy, you should represent every group in the society. And it, of course, encouraged a lot of dialogue and arguments. But I think what is very clear with this example that in reality, this kind of movement would never come to this kind of the museum, because museum was already since it was for democracy and migration, it was kind of conceived as something maybe social democratic or left-wing leaning. So what's the point of right-wing, especially far right, to come into this place? And here I see this potential for museum activism, because for me, museum activism is not when, let's say, social movement comes into museum space as something pre-designed and does something, but when the museum institution itself takes the position, takes the stance, and is very transparent about it. And this comes in contradiction with this, again, conception of museums being neutral and apolitical, which can be discussed further, because they were never apolitical and neutral. They just conveyed the grand narrative of the state or of other actors. But however, so if museum is not afraid about talking what are their stance, where is their kind of position in the society, and what are the values they want to represent, then it's kind of clear how they would approach narrating this type of history. Of course, in the Museum of Movements, if they would do the exhibition about neo-Nazi movement, it probably would not represent this movement. So they would be very happy about this, right? But here again, this kind of, but then we will have to agree that we are not neutral, that we are not apolitical. We will have to be very clear about our political leaning, our stance, and what are the values we are standing for. And that is that can be considered to be problematic, because this kind of inherent framework still divides. Okay, this is knowledge production, this is arts, this has nothing to do with politics. Politics is something maybe dirty, maybe like being frowned upon. But hello, we are living in the contemporary world where everything is politics, right? So this kind of museum activism is a challenge, and it demands a lot of courage. In different circumstances and contexts, more than a lot of courage. I mean, you cannot compare Sweden, which is still a democratic country, to Russia, which is not very democratic in this sense. So people can be afraid of less funding, for instance, but are not afraid to lose their jobs or go to jail or something like this for being political.
Yeah, very interesting, this approach. Apropos activism, I was thinking about, and apropos contemporary politics, there were different discourses in the public space from different European leaders, and they would say that they would follow value-based policies. So actually, maybe in this type of approach, this value-based, I don't know, methodology or filters for knowledge would be applied in order to, I don't know, to keep the balance between all these types of narrative. Or why not to have one exhibition from one point of view, and then, well, temporary exhibitions anyway, not to mess up with the permanent one, because that's another discussion. What is a permanent exhibition within a museum? And then change the next temporary exhibition to be from a different point of view. Why not from a contradictory point of view? And within these types of frameworks, people just to raise a question in their heads and go further on. So actually not to deliver actually any principle at all, but just to put it up for discussion. What do you think? Which exhibition you think was more, I don't know, was better, has more truth in it, was more factual, was I don't know, was representing the good guys. So this also depends on what stand do you take when you say museum activist, no?
Yeah, exactly. And I think basically the agonistic approach in the museums boils down to we don't give you any answers. We are instigating discussions, and we suggest you to ask questions, ask more questions. The visitor, ideally, or maybe it's just my imagination, but ideally the visitor should be left with more questions than answers when they exit the museum. And this will kind of hopefully propel critical thinking and reflection and thinking about where we are in the world now, why everything happens the way it happens, and what are the connections and contexts, and yeah, the proposal for self-reflection.
Yeah, actually, this I don't know how to call it, this concept of duality. I mean, one day I'm standing for this type of principle, the next day maybe I'm standing for a conflictual one. So this is actually also an individual aspect that we can observe, which is already internalized. I mean, you don't know, okay, because you don't have all the information. You may be biased without knowing it. So there is a lot of work to do. What I wanted to also to put forward to discussion, actually, when we thought about this project, Nordic Insights, we were also very interested in this type of cancel culture. It was before Trump, because now we have to discuss other types of cancel culture. But then when we wrote it, it was not this change that we observed in the last year globally. And we were very intrigued by the idea of having public art, mostly monuments that were figurative ones, representing different persons that the municipality or the public authority consider it to be either a hero or a developer in one sense or another. So it was a figure that should be remembered, and thus the sculpture in the public space. And for example, when it was that the Black Lives Matter movement that sparkled all around the world, and it was that Edward Colston statue that was toppled down and thrown into the harbor, and then in Bristol, and then it was interesting enough the reaction of the public authority that okay, let's start a conversation, because apparently there was so unspoken words there, and there we have it. And then they made a petition, and they collected ideas, and then should we put it in a museum, and then make actually a narrative or put it in a context so that you would understand why that statue was okay there until something sparkles. So actually it's about because you also mentioned the context, that the context sometimes may be more more important or relevant than the actual event fact. So when they decided to put to remove it from the harbor and put it in the museum, it was actually why not an approach that we would welcome? I mean, okay, putting it in a museum, it would not be that, as you mentioned, the 19th century approach that you claim, then you put their figures that you think they were crucial for your national development and so on and so forth. But actually, you put it to be not a fire starter, hopefully a discussion starter. So how would you see, because in your practice you definitely encounter this type of issues around public art, and how would you approach it? And if you think that the instruments that you are using in the work of a museum can be applied or can be adapted to public art as well.
Yes, absolutely. And it's exactly what you say. You need to put it in a context and provide more context. And we can see this issue of contested monuments in different circumstances as well. You know very well in the post-Soviet space, there was a removal of statues of Lenin, for instance, and there's this beautiful word in Russian language, Leninopad, like the fall of Lenin's, like the autumn fall, for instance. And each post-Soviet state decided on their own how they want to address this and how they want to reframe it. Someone probably put all the Lenin statues in one open air museum or park, and this can also be a discussion starter. Someone wants to destroy it, and this is a difficult question, right? Because there is this understanding, especially in contemporary world, that some things can hurt, some things are disturbing, and seeing these things all the time. And it can be the monument to the slave trader, it can be the monument to authoritarian leader. People probably do not want to see them being glorified on their streets. But my thought as a researcher is it always better to let them stand and provide the context actually, because then it can again spark the discussion. It can bring the societal attention to this issue. Because if we and I think the Colston incident was actually a beautiful act of activism, of memory activism, and it was very it was celebrated for a reason. So some monuments probably should fall, but some should stay where they are and remind us about this issue. Because if we just take away all the contested monuments and all the things, all the statues which remind us of slavery, transatlantic slavery, for instance, then how will we explain what it is? Maybe we can remove them and put them all in the museum. This can be one way of doing this, but also exactly as you say, museum is a public space, and it's one of the last democratic public spaces probably to address the history, as opposed to the state kind of narratives. But it also is, it has its own boundaries. There are not all the population visits the museum, but probably all the population of the city walks around the public square where the contested monument is. And there, if it's still there, there can be acts of counter memory, for instance. All these examples when the contested monuments were colored with some kind of color, or some additional artwork explained why this is what it is. And also we need to remember that there are different types of contested monuments and different types of contestations around them. we can talk about this kind of difficult history legacies. And there's also, it is another very interesting question, why and when these statues were erected and who ordered, who commissioned to do it. Like with all the Southern General statues in the US, which were actually a lot of them were commissioned by a special association which wanted to celebrate the cause and so on and so forth. But for instance, another example, and I'm pretty sure that anti-racist monument in Malmö can also be considered contested from different points of view. But another example we have here in Umeå, in the north of Sweden, it is the statue which is called Listen, and it represents, it was erected after the Me Too movement. And it shows like a pink panther which is roaring. So it is some kind of representation of female rage, and you know that, listen to me, I finally came to speak. And when it was erected, someone drove the truck into it because apparently they were not very happy about this, woke ideology being represented on the city's square. So there are different types of contestations, but as long as they spark the dialogue, as long as they spark the discussion and debate in media, for instance, they keep the difficulty of it visible. And this is extremely important, I think, to keep the sensitivity and difficulty visible, to not forget about what hurts people, what kind of raises considerations from different groups of people, and that we still need to address it. It's not the very, clean and sterile picture of society which has consensus about everything and everyone is happy and just, yeah.
Yeah, I was just Google it to see the pink. It's quite nice.
Yeah, it's beautiful, and I like walking by it.
It really pops up. I mean, it's not timid at all. So you can definitely, if not listen to it, you definitely you can observe it. You can see it. Yeah. Yeah, and as final remarks, it's very interesting that actually you very well frame this idea of approaches in museum and what would get to a museum, what type of narrative, what type of object, and apropos public art and public display. Actually, maybe we can look behind this. I mean, it's a show of power. It's a show of identity. It's a show of trauma, because we also talk about this as well. So actually, maybe within a contemporary framework, what would you open for discussion when you are talking about culture and memory in general? So, what type of approaches would this type of public art take? Because when you want to look behind and see what type of motive sparkle all this process from commissioning or from discussion, you should also look at what type of stakeholders that we continuously talk about, these types of different entities and persons that are influenced by this type of public art. So actually, how would the process look like? I mean, if you commission, this means that you are most probably a public institution that has the power, the means, the money to do that. Commissioning means that you make a call, the artist appear. What do the artists do? Do they speak with whom? With the communities? Who are the communities? Are these only the neighbors? Are the, I don't know, the citizens, the passers-by? How would you approach them? With what type of instruments, sociological instruments? So how would you see this? Actually, we can call it change in public space, where you can see different types of public art, be it a monument or I don't know. Other types of why not temporary installation, and do you think there should be a filter or a connection with a wider context, or a connection with a certain event, an emotional event or a historical event? How would you see this type of approach, of process?
Yeah, that's a complicated one. But I would say there's always two sides of this process. One is very like administrative, bureaucratic side, which has to deal with the commissioning, and there's always some kind of power relation behind it because someone orders someone to do something, right? And of course, they can have an agenda, they can have an idea what they want to do, which type of memories they want to commemorate also. And to this part, I think something which was happening quite a lot during the last decades is some kind of grassroots counterpart when the community comes together and either ask the municipality or kind of work on this community basis, or even individual based idea of we need to commemorate something. And one of the examples is very well known network of monuments which are called Stolpersteine, the monuments commemorating the victims of Holocaust in the European cities, where anyone can order this kind of small cobblestone with the names and the dates, and put it in front of the house where the victim was taken from, for instance. Which I think is a beautiful initiative, which shows that there are so many people who care and want to contribute to this. And it's very kind of scattered. It's not organized on the state level or on the municipality level. It's more of an artwork which represents the wish of people to remember. And interestingly enough, this initiative was also mirrored in Russia in the 2010s, when they made a similar concept, which is called the last address. But since it's very impractical with the snow and everything to put the cobblestones, they put the plaques on the walls of the houses where the victim of the repressions were taken from. And it is also a grassroots initiative, not only not provided by the state, but even kind of opposed by the statist activists. So there were instances, especially when authoritarianism start growing, of people tearing down these plaques and kind of saying that this is all the false history, we didn't have any repressions, or Stalin was right, or whatever. So this is also a point of contestation, right, between different communities, between the state and the communities, between I think this kind of work is more productive than when someone approaches a certain community and start like, okay, we want to represent you. Let's participate in several workshops, because this is still kind of top-down initiative then. And when people come together and want to be represented, it's very different. from this. So this is a part of the very commissioning process, and another part is, I think, our public spaces are wide enough for have any type of monuments. You can build new ones, you can rethink old ones, which might be even more productive. As I said, do some kind of counter installation or put some context or just add more information about the time when this monument was erected and what was happening and why it is important to know. Because otherwise, I think you also had it in one of your previous talks, the mention of the Louis de Geer statue in Norrköping, which was like one of the founder of Swedish industries, but also complicit in the transatlantic slave trade. And this is not the fact that everyone knows about this guy. They just walk around the statue and, okay, this is another old man which stays in the middle of the city. Why do we care? So if you add this information, it starts some kind of curiosity, not from everyone, but people start looking actually, why had it been like this? Did Sweden actually had colonies? Yes, it did, and was involved in different kind of instances. So this starts to be more interesting for everyone. And as my final point, because I am a teacher, a university lecturer, I think we need to know more about heritage, and we need to learn how to perceive it critically and how to kind of understand these monuments that we already have and that we want to erect. This is very important.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really enjoyed your example. I seen like a personalized monuments. You really have ownership. Apropos, whose the space, public space is, or to whom the public space belongs to. Now it's very clear. Well, if it's in front of your house, maybe it's quite a private space, but you can see it from the street. Olga, thank you very much for your input. Quite interesting, and personally more interesting to me, because you get to understand both sides. So actually, this northeast connection that we were working along, and we are still working upon, and your focus on types of representation, and how would you show identity? How would you show what deserves or not to be included in an official history, because we were talking about national museums as well. So yeah, I will keep following your work, and thank you so much.